My wife came home glowing. Not metaphorically. I mean, she literally had this weird, ethereal shine about her, like she'd been dipped in some kind of spiritual varnish. Elaine stood in our farmhouse kitchen at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, humming some tune I'd never heard, wearing a white dress I'd never seen, and sporting a crystal necklace that definitely wasn't in our budget. "How was your awakening session?" I asked, not looking up from the cabinet I was refinishing in the corner. Being a carpenter meant I was always fixing something in this old house we'd bought 3 years ago. The place had character, which is realtor speak for everything creaks and nothing works right. "Transformative," she whispered, like she was sharing state secrets. "Solomon opened my soul tonight, Gabriel. I can feel the universe flowing through me." I set down my sandpaper and really looked at her. Elaine taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school. She was practical, logical, the kind of woman who made grocery lists and balanced checkbooks. This glowing, whispering creature in my kitchen was someone else entirely. "That's great, honey." I tried to keep the sarcasm out of my voice. "Did the universe mention when you'd be home? Because you said 9 o'clock. She floated past me, actually floated, like her feet barely touched the worn linoleum, and headed for the stairs. "Time is an illusion, Gabe. Solomon taught us that linear thinking constrains the spirit." "Right. Well, my spirit is constrained by a 7 a.m. job site, so I'm heading to bed." But she was already upstairs, and I could hear her running a bath, at midnight, because apparently enlightenment required excellent hygiene. I went back to sanding, but my mind was racing. Elaine had been attending these spiritual awakening sessions at the sanctuary for about 6 weeks now. The sanctuary was this converted church on the outskirts of our little New England town, run by a guy named Solomon Creed, who'd rolled into town about 8 months ago with a message of inner peace and cosmic consciousness. At first, I'd been supportive. Elaine had been feeling restless lately, talking about how teaching wasn't fulfilling her deeper purpose. If some meditation and positive thinking helped her find direction, great. But this glowing thing was new and weird. Her phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up with a text from someone called Spiritual Sister Taylor. "Still feeling the energy. Can't wait for tomorrow night's portal opening ceremony." Portal opening? What the heck was that supposed to mean? I heard the bathwater stop running upstairs. Then Elaine started singing, actually singing, some kind of chant in what sounded like made-up Latin. The melody was haunting, beautiful in a way that made my skin crawl. Something was definitely wrong here. My practical, sensible wife was turning into some kind of mystical creature, and I had a feeling Solomon Creed was behind it. The question was, what exactly was he opening besides souls? I climbed the stairs to our bedroom but stopped outside the bathroom door. Through the frosted glass, I could see Elaine's silhouette in the tub, arms raised like she was conducting an invisible orchestra. She was still humming that strange melody, and for just a moment, I swear, I could see that glow emanating from her skin. "Elaine?" I knocked softly. "You okay in there?" "Never better," she called back, her voice dreamy and distant. "Solomon says the awakening process continues even after we leave the sanctuary. My chakras are still vibrating with his energy." His energy. Something about the way she said that made my carpenter's instincts kick in, the same instincts that told me when a foundation was unsound or a beam was about to snap. This whole situation felt structurally unstable. I went to bed alone that night, listening to my wife hum mysterious songs in the bathtub and wondering what the hell was happening to my marriage. Outside our bedroom window, the old oak tree cast shadows across the moonlit yard, and somewhere in the distance, I could swear I heard other voices singing the same haunting melody Elaine had been humming. The next morning, I woke up to find Elaine already gone. She'd left a note on the kitchen counter. "Early morning meditation at the sanctuary. Don't wait up tonight. We're having an overnight retreat. Love and light, E." Love and light? Elaine had never signed anything love and light in her entire life. She signed things Love, Elaine, or just E when she was in a hurry. This new age nonsense was getting out of hand. I grabbed my tool belt and headed out to the Henderson job site, but I couldn't concentrate on installing their new kitchen cabinets. My mind kept drifting back to that glow, that strange perfume Elaine had been wearing, and the way she'd said Solomon's name like he was some kind of deity. Around noon, I got a call from Taylor Morrison, Elaine's best friend since college. Taylor was also attending these awakening sessions, but she sounded different on the phone, breathless and excited in a way that reminded me of teenagers talking about their first crush. "Gabe, have you seen the change in Elaine? Isn't it incredible? Solomon has this amazing gift for opening people up to their true potential." "Yeah, it's something," I said, holding my phone between my shoulder and ear while I measured cabinet spacing. "What exactly happens at these sessions, Taylor?" "Oh, it's hard to explain to someone who hasn't experienced it. Solomon guides us through these incredible spiritual exercises. He has this way of seeing right into your soul, you know? He can identify exactly what's blocking your energy flow. And then what? Then he opens you up. It's the most incredible feeling, Gabe. Like every cell in your body is suddenly alive and connected to the universe." Elaine was practically glowing when she left last night. There was that word again. Glowing. And Taylor said it like it was the most natural thing in the world. "So this overnight retreat thing, is that normal?" Taylor giggled, actually giggled like a schoolgirl. "Sometimes the awakening process takes longer for certain souls. Solomon says some people need extended sessions to fully open their spiritual channels. Elaine is one of the lucky ones. She's so receptive to his teachings." Something cold settled in my stomach. "How often do people need these extended sessions?" "Oh, it varies. I've had 3 overnight awakenings myself. Solomon says I have very deep chakras that require intensive work." The way she said intensive work made me want to put my fist through the Hendersons' drywall. Instead, I took a deep breath and tried to sound casual. "This Solomon guy, what's his background? Is he some kind of certified therapist or spiritual counselor?" "Gabe, you're thinking too linearly again. Solomon's credentials come from the universe itself. He doesn't need some piece of paper to validate his gift. You should come to a session sometime. I think you'd really benefit from some spiritual opening." "I'll think about it," I lied. "Listen, Taylor, I should get back to work." "Of course. Oh, and don't worry about Elaine tonight. She's in excellent hands with Solomon. He takes very good care of all his awakening students." After she hung up, I stood there in the Hendersons' half-finished kitchen, holding my phone and trying to process what I'd just heard. 3 overnight sessions. Deep chakras, requiring intensive work. Excellent hands. My wife was having an affair. I was suddenly certain of it. All this spiritual awakening nonsense was just a cover for something much more earthly and much more hurtful. The glow, the strange perfume, the late nights, the overnight retreats. It all made perfect sense now. But I needed proof before I could do anything about it. And I needed to understand exactly what kind of operation this Solomon Creed was running at the sanctuary. That evening, instead of going home to an empty house, I drove out to the sanctuary. It sat on a hill about 10 miles outside town, a white clapboard church that had been abandoned for years before Solomon bought it and fixed it up. Cars filled the gravel parking lot. Expensive cars, I noticed. BMWs, Mercedes, a few Audis. Whatever Solomon was selling, his customers had money to spend. I parked across the road behind a stand of pine trees and watched. Through the tall windows, I could see figures in white robes moving around inside, candles flickering, shadows dancing on the walls. It looked like something out of a movie, the kind where the hero realizes he's stumbled onto something much bigger and more dangerous than he expected. Around 9 o'clock, people started coming out. I recognized several faces from town. The bank president's wife, the mayor's daughter, Dr. Peterson's receptionist. All women, I realized. Every single person leaving the sanctuary was female, and they all had that same ethereal glow Elaine had been sporting, but not everyone left. Several cars remained in the parking lot, including Elaine's Honda Civic. The overnight retreat crowd, apparently. The chosen few who needed extended spiritual opening. I sat in my truck until nearly midnight, watching those lit windows and wondering what was happening inside. Finally, the lights went out, and I drove home to my empty house, my mind spinning with questions and suspicions, and a growing anger that felt like acid in my chest. The next morning, Elaine came home around 7, still wearing that white dress, still glowing, still humming that haunting melody. She looked exhausted, but satisfied, like she'd just finished some kind of marathon. "How was the retreat?" I asked, watching her face carefully. "Life-changing," she said, pouring herself a cup of coffee with shaking hands. "Solomon worked with me all night on opening my deepest spiritual channels. I feel completely transformed." "All night?" She nodded, not meeting my eyes. "Some blockages require intensive work to clear. Solomon says I have very complex energy patterns." Complex energy patterns. Right. I was starting to understand Solomon's particular brand of spiritual therapy, and it had nothing to do with chakras or cosmic consciousness. "Maybe I should meet this Solomon guy," I said, "if he's having such a positive impact on your life." Elaine's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. "Oh, I don't think that's necessary, Gabe. Solomon's work is very specialized. He only works with people who are truly ready for spiritual awakening. And I'm not ready? It's not that." She set down her cup and finally looked at me, and I could see something in her eyes. Guilt, maybe, or fear. "It's just that Solomon's methods are very particular. He needs to establish a deep personal connection with his students before he can begin the opening process." Deep personal connection. I bet he did. "Well, maybe someday I'll be ready," I said, forcing a smile. "In the meantime, I'm glad you're finding fulfillment." She smiled back, but it looked strained. "I should shower and get ready for school. We're having another session tonight, just a regular one, not an overnight." After she left for work, I sat at my kitchen table and made a decision. I was going to find out exactly what Solomon Creed was doing to my wife and all those other women, and then I was going to make sure the whole town knew about it. But first, I needed help, and I knew exactly who to call. Miranda Voss had been 3 years behind me in high school, but we'd reconnected a few years ago when she moved back to town to work for the local newspaper. She was smart, ambitious, and had a nose for stories that made people uncomfortable, which made her perfect for what I had in mind. I called her that afternoon during my lunch break. "Gabe Tate, what a surprise. How's married life treating you?" "That's actually why I'm calling, Miranda. I think I might have a story for you." There was a pause, then her voice shifted into professional mode. "What kind of story?" "The kind that involves a charismatic spiritual leader, overnight retreats, and a lot of married women who come home glowing." "You have my attention. Can you meet me at Murphy's bar tonight around 8? Murphy's was the kind of place where locals went to drink beer and mind their own business, perfect for a conversation I didn't want overheard. I agreed to meet her there and spent the rest of the day trying to focus on work instead of imagining what my wife might be doing at that very moment in Solomon's spiritual sessions. Murphy's was dimly lit and smelled like decades of cigarette smoke and spilled beer. Miranda was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a notebook and a skeptical expression. "Okay, Gabe," she said after I'd ordered a beer. "Tell me about this glowing wife situation." I told her everything: the personality changes, the overnight retreats, the mysterious texts, the way Elaine talked about Solomon like he was some kind of savior. Miranda listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting down notes. "And you think he's having affairs with these women?" she asked when I finished. "I think he's running some kind of operation that uses spiritual awakening as a cover for something else. Maybe it's affairs, maybe it's financial fraud, maybe it's both. But something's not right." Miranda tapped her pen against her notebook. "It's an interesting theory, but I'd need more than suspicions to run a story. Do you have any evidence? Not yet, but I was hoping you might know how to get some. She smiled, the kind of smile that had probably gotten her into trouble more than once. As it happens, I've been hearing whispers about the sanctuary for months. Nothing concrete, just rumors and gossip. But if you're right about this, it could be a huge story. What kind of whispers? Well, for starters, Solomon Creed isn't his real name. I did some digging when he first showed up in town. His real name is Stanley Kowalski, and he's got a history of running spiritual retreats that got shut down in 3 different states. My beer suddenly tasted bitter. Shut down for what? Financial irregularities mostly, but there were also some complaints from former members about inappropriate conduct. Nothing that stuck in court, but enough to make him pack up and move on each time. So he's done this before. Looks like it. And here's the interesting part. In each case, he targeted small towns with a lot of wealthy, educated women. Doctors' wives, lawyers' wives, business owners' wives, women with money and influence who were looking for something meaningful in their lives. That described our town perfectly. And it described Elaine, who'd been feeling restless and unfulfilled for months before Solomon arrived. "What do you need from me?" I asked. Miranda leaned forward, her eyes bright with the kind of excitement that meant she smelled a good story. "I need inside information. Names of members, details about the sessions, financial records if you can get them. And I need testimony from former members, women who've left the group and might be willing to talk." "How do I find former members?" "Leave that to me. I've got contacts in the neighboring towns where Solomon operated before. If his pattern holds, there should be plenty of women who figured out what he was really up to." We spent another hour planning our investigation. Miranda would work her sources and start building a profile of Solomon's previous operations. I would try to gather information from inside the sanctuary, carefully, so I didn't tip him off. "One more thing," Miranda said, as we were getting ready to leave. "If you're right about this, and Solomon realizes you're onto him, he might try to turn your wife against you completely. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about Elaine humming in the bathtub, about the way she said Solomon's name, about the glow that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. "She's already halfway gone," I said. "At this point, I've got nothing left to lose." The next few days fell into a routine. Elaine would go to work, then to the sanctuary, then come home late with that same ethereal glow and distant expression. I would go to work, then spend my evenings trying to gather information about Solomon and his operation. I started by talking to Nora Flanagan, who'd been tending bar at Murphy's for 20 years and knew everyone's business in town. If there were rumors about the sanctuary, Nora would have heard them. "That place gives me the creeps," she said, wiping down glasses while I nursed my second beer of the evening. "Too many married women going in there looking for enlightenment and coming out looking like they found something else entirely." "What do you mean?" Nora glanced around to make sure we weren't overheard, then leaned across the bar. "My neighbor's daughter started going there about 2 months ago. Sweet girl, married to a nice boy who works at the hardware store. Within 3 weeks, she was talking about leaving her husband to pursue her spiritual destiny. Started staying out all night, stopped wearing her wedding ring, began dressing like some kind of hippie priestess." "What happened?" "Her husband put his foot down, threatened to leave her if she didn't quit the group. She chose the group. They're getting divorced now, and she's moved into some kind of communal living situation with other sanctuary members." My stomach clenched. "Other members live together?" "That's what I heard. Solomon's got this big house on the other side of town where his most advanced students stay. Calls it a spiritual retreat center, but it looks more like a commune to me." This was news. Miranda hadn't mentioned anything about a communal living situation. I made a mental note to drive by Solomon's house and see what I could observe. "Has anyone else left the group?" I asked. "A few, but most of them moved away afterward, said they were too embarrassed to stay in town. There's one woman, though, lives over in Millfield now. Janet something. She was one of Solomon's first converts when he got here, but she left after about a month. Wouldn't say why, but she looked pretty shaken up when she moved out. Janet something wasn't much to go on, but it was a start. I thanked Nora and headed home, my mind spinning with new information. A commune, former members who left town in embarrassment, a pattern of broken marriages and shattered families. When I got home, Elaine was in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the floor with her eyes closed and her hands pressed together in prayer position. She was wearing a white cotton dress I'd never seen before, and her hair was loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in her usual practical ponytail. "How was your session?" I asked, settling into my recliner. She opened her eyes slowly, like she was returning from a great distance. "Incredible. Solomon says I'm making remarkable progress in opening my spiritual channels. He thinks I might be ready for advanced training soon." "Advanced training?" "It's a deeper level of awakening. Only his most gifted students qualify. It involves more intensive work, longer sessions, closer collaboration with Solomon himself." The way she said, "closer collaboration," made my skin crawl. That sounds like a big commitment. It is. Advanced students sometimes live at the retreat center so they can focus completely on their spiritual development without outside distractions. Outside distractions. Like husbands, apparently. "Would you want to do that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. Elaine was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. "I don't know. The idea is both exciting and terrifying. It would mean leaving behind everything familiar, everything safe. But Solomon says that's the only way to achieve true enlightenment, by surrendering completely to the process." "What about your job? What about us?" She looked at me then, and for just a moment, I saw a flicker of the old Elaine. Practical, sensible, concerned about real-world consequences. But then it was gone, replaced by that dreamy, distant expression. "Solomon says that attachments to material concerns hold us back from our highest potential. If I'm meant to pursue advanced training, the universe will provide solutions to those practical matters." The universe would provide solutions, right? More likely, Solomon would provide justifications for abandoning her responsibilities and moving into his commune full-time. I went to bed that night more determined than ever to expose whatever Solomon was doing. But I also felt a growing sense of urgency. If Elaine moved into his retreat center, I might lose any chance of getting her back. The next morning, I called Miranda with an update. "A commune," she said thoughtfully. "That fits the pattern from his previous operations. I've been making calls to women who left his groups in other towns. Want to hear what I've learned?" "Tell me." Solomon, has a very specific method. He starts with group sessions focused on meditation and positive thinking. Nothing too unusual there. But then he begins identifying women who seem particularly receptive to his message. He calls them gifted souls and offers them individual counseling sessions. Let me guess, the individual sessions get more intensive over time. Exactly, and they always involve physical contact. He calls it energy work or chakra alignment, but it's basically massage therapy without a license. The women I talked to said he had this way of making them feel special, chosen, like they were part of some elite group of spiritual seekers. And then? Then come the overnight retreats. He tells them that certain spiritual breakthroughs can only happen in extended sessions, away from the distractions of normal life. The women I interviewed said these retreats involved a lot of touching, a lot of intimate conversation, and a lot of pressure to open themselves completely to the experience. I felt that familiar acid burn in my chest. Did any of them actually say he was having affairs? Not in so many words, but they all described feeling confused about the boundaries between spiritual guidance and personal intimacy. One woman said she realized afterward that she'd been manipulated into doing things she wouldn't normally do, all in the name of spiritual growth. What made them leave? Different things. Some got suspicious when Solomon started asking for large donations to support his mission. Others began to notice that the promised spiritual breakthroughs never actually materialized. They just kept needing more and more intensive sessions. And a few figured out that they weren't as special as they'd thought when they discovered he was giving the same chosen soul speech to multiple women. Can any of them go on record? 2 of them agreed to talk, but only if we can guarantee their anonymity. They're embarrassed about being taken in, and they don't want their families to know the details of what happened. That was something, at least. What's our next step? I need more current information, names of local members, details about the financial setup, maybe some photos of the retreat center. Think you can get inside the sanctuary and document what's actually happening there? The idea of infiltrating Solomon's operation both excited and terrified me, but if it was the only way to save my marriage and expose his scam, I was willing to try. I'll figure something out, I said. Be careful, Gabe. If Solomon realizes you're investigating him, he might accelerate whatever timeline he has for your wife. These guys don't like loose ends. After I hung up, I sat in my truck outside the job site and tried to come up with a plan. I needed to get inside the sanctuary, preferably during one of their sessions. I needed to see firsthand what Solomon was doing to these women, and I needed to do it without getting caught. That evening, I told Elaine I was working late and would grab dinner in town. Instead, I drove out to the sanctuary and parked in the same spot I'd used before, behind the pine trees across the road. Cars were already filling the parking lot, the usual collection of expensive vehicles belonging to the town's most successful women. Around 7:30, I saw my chance. A delivery truck pulled up to the back of the building, and the driver began unloading boxes of what looked like candles and incense. While he was busy making his delivery, I slipped across the road and around to the side of the building. The sanctuary had tall, old-fashioned windows that started about 4 feet off the ground. By standing on an overturned crate I found behind the building, I could just see into the main room. What I saw made my stomach turn. About 20 women sat in a circle on the floor, all wearing white robes, all with their eyes closed. In the center of the circle stood Solomon Creed, a tall, lean man in his late 40s with shoulder-length gray hair and the kind of intense eyes that probably made women think he could see into their souls. He was speaking in a low, hypnotic voice about opening themselves to cosmic energy, about surrendering their earthly concerns to achieve higher consciousness. As he spoke, he moved around the circle, placing his hands on each woman's shoulders, neck, or head. But it wasn't the touching that bothered me most. It was the way the women responded to it. They leaned into his touch like flowers turning toward the sun. They sighed and moaned softly when his hands moved over them. They looked at him with expressions of absolute devotion and trust. And there, directly across from my hiding spot, sat my wife. Elaine's face was tilted upward toward Solomon, her eyes closed, her lips slightly parted. When he reached her position in the circle, he knelt behind her and placed both hands on her shoulders, leaning down to whisper something in her ear. She shuddered, actually shuddered, and a soft sound escaped her lips that I'd heard before, but never in response to another man's touch. I nearly put my fist through the window right then. Only the knowledge that I needed more evidence kept me crouched on that crate, watching my wife respond to another man's hands with an intimacy that made me want to tear the building down brick by brick. Solomon finished his circuit of the circle and returned to the center. Tonight we'll be working on advanced chakra alignment, he announced. I'll need to work with each of you individually to assess your energy patterns. Please remain in meditation while you wait your turn. Individual sessions. I watched as Solomon led the first woman, Dr. Peterson's receptionist, into a smaller room off the main sanctuary. Through that window, I could see what looked like a massage table surrounded by candles. I couldn't see exactly what happened in that room, but I could see enough. The session lasted about 15 minutes, and when the woman emerged, she had that same glowing, satisfied expression I'd been seeing on Elaine's face for weeks. One by one, Solomon worked his way through the circle. Each woman spent her 15 minutes in that candle-lit room, and each one came out looking transformed. By the time he got to Elaine, I was gripping the windowsill so hard my knuckles had turned white. Elaine disappeared into the smaller room, and I repositioned myself to get a better view through that window. What I saw confirmed every suspicion I'd had about Solomon's methods. He had Elaine lying on the massage table, still wearing her white robe, but with the neckline pulled down to expose her shoulders and collarbone. His hands moved over her skin in slow, deliberate patterns while he spoke to her in that same hypnotic voice. "Feel the energy flowing through you," he murmured, his hands tracing lines from her neck to her chest. "Let yourself open completely to the cosmic forces that want to fill you with light." Elaine's breathing became deeper, more rhythmic. Her back arched slightly under his touch, and when he leaned down to whisper something directly into her ear, she turned her face toward his with an expression of such complete surrender that I had to look away. I'd seen enough, more than enough. I climbed down from my perch and made it back to my truck before I did something that would land me in prison. But as I drove home, my hands shaking with rage and my mind spinning with images I couldn't unsee, I knew exactly what I had to do. Solomon Creed thought he was running some kind of sophisticated spiritual scam, using meditation and energy work to manipulate vulnerable women. He thought he was untouchable because his victims were too embarrassed or confused to speak out against him. He was about to learn how wrong he could be. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. I had more important things to do than install kitchen cabinets. I had a predator to expose and a marriage to save. My first stop was Miranda's office at the newspaper. She took one look at my face and poured me a cup of coffee, without asking if I wanted it. "You look like hell, Gabe. What happened?" I told her about my reconnaissance mission, about what I'd witnessed in that candlelit room, about the way my wife had responded to Solomon's touch. Miranda listened with the focused intensity of a reporter who'd just stumbled onto the story of her career. "This is exactly what I needed," she said when I finished. "Eyewitness testimony of inappropriate conduct. But we need more before we can go public. We need multiple sources, documentation, maybe some kind of recording." "I can get recordings," I said. "I know when they meet, and I know how to get close enough to hear what's happening." "That could be dangerous, if Solomon catches you spying on his sessions." "Let me worry about Solomon. What I need from you is contact information for those former members you interviewed. I want to talk to them myself." Miranda hesitated. "Gabe, I promised them anonymity. I can't just give out their personal information." "Then set up a conference call. Don't tell them my name if you have to, but I need to hear their stories firsthand. And they need to know that what happened to them is still happening to other women." She considered this, then nodded. "I'll make some calls. Can you meet me here tonight around 7? I agreed and spent the rest of the day driving around town, thinking about strategy. I needed more than just testimony from former members and recordings of Solomon's sessions. I needed something that would destroy his credibility completely and permanently. That's when I remembered what Nora had told me about Janet Something, the local woman who'd left Solomon's group and moved to Millfield. If I could find her and convince her to talk, I'd have a local victim willing to go on record. Millfield was only about 30 miles away, but it might as well have been another planet as far as small-town gossip networks were concerned. It was the perfect place for someone to hide from embarrassment and start over. I drove to Millfield that afternoon and started asking around. In a town that size, it didn't take long to track down Janet Morrison, a woman in her early 40s who worked as a librarian and lived alone in a small apartment above the local bookstore. She was reluctant to talk at first, but when I explained that my wife was currently involved with Solomon and that we were trying to expose his operation, her resistance crumbled. "I should have spoken up months ago. she said, inviting me into her tiny living room. But I was so ashamed of how easily he fooled me. What happened? Janet poured herself a glass of wine with shaking hands before answering. I joined his group about a month after he came to town. I'd just gone through a difficult divorce, and I was looking for some kind of spiritual guidance to help me move forward. At first, everything seemed legitimate. Group meditation, discussions about finding inner peace, that sort of thing. When did it change? After about 2 weeks, Solomon told me I had exceptional spiritual sensitivity and invited me to participate in individual counseling sessions. He said I was one of the few people he'd met who was capable of achieving true enlightenment. The same line he'd probably used on dozens of women, including my wife. The individual sessions started innocently enough, Janet continued, just talking about my goals and fears while he guided me through relaxation exercises. But gradually, they became more physical. He said he needed to align my chakras and clear energy blockages through hands-on healing. Did you realize what was happening? Not at first. He was very skilled at making everything seem spiritual and therapeutic. He'd talk about ancient healing traditions and cosmic energy while his hands moved over my body. It felt wrong, but he was so convincing about the spiritual significance of what we were doing. What made you leave? Janet took a long sip of wine before answering. I walked in on him having one of those healing sessions with another woman. She was completely undressed, and what he was doing to her had nothing to do with chakras or energy work. When I confronted him about it, he tried to convince me that what I'd witnessed was a sacred ritual that I wasn't spiritually advanced enough to understand. Did you report him to anyone? I was too embarrassed, and honestly, I was afraid no one would believe me. Solomon was very popular in town, especially with influential women. I figured it would be my word against his, and his word carried a lot more weight. Would you be willing to go public now? With other women backing up your story? Janet was quiet for a long moment, staring into her wine glass. If it would help stop him from doing this to other women, yes. I've been carrying this guilt for months, knowing he was probably still manipulating people and I hadn't done anything to stop it. I gave her Miranda's contact information and promised to keep her updated on our investigation. As I drove back home, I felt like I was finally building a case strong enough to bring Solomon down. But I also felt the weight of time pressing against me. Every day I waited was another day Solomon had to work his manipulation on Elaine and the other women in his group. That evening, I met Miranda at her office for the conference call with the former members from Solomon's previous operations. 2 women agreed to participate, one from Vermont and one from New Hampshire. Their stories were remarkably similar to Janet's. Initial recruitment based on claims of special spiritual gifts, gradual escalation of physical contact during individual sessions, and growing pressure to make larger financial contributions to support Solomon's mission. He has this way of making you feel like you're part of something important, the woman from Vermont explained. Like you've been chosen for a special purpose that ordinary people couldn't understand. It's incredibly seductive, especially if you're going through a difficult time in your life. Did he ever explicitly ask for intimate favors? Miranda asked. Not in so many words, but the implication was always there. He'd talk about complete surrender to the spiritual process and opening yourself fully to cosmic energy. If you questioned what was happening, he'd suggest that your resistance was evidence of spiritual blockages that needed more intensive work to clear. The woman from New Hampshire added, He's very careful about legal boundaries. Everything he does can be explained as legitimate spiritual counseling or energy work, but the cumulative effect is definitely manipulative and exploitative. After the call ended, Miranda and I sat in her office planning our next moves. We've got enough for a preliminary story, she said. But if we really want to destroy his credibility, we need current documentation. Photos, recordings, financial records, something that shows he's still operating the same way here. I can get recordings of his sessions. and I might be able to get inside his house to photograph the living conditions at his so-called retreat center. Gabe, that's breaking and entering. I can't be associated with anything illegal. Then don't be associated with it. I'll get the information on my own and figure out how to get it to you anonymously. Miranda looked uncomfortable, but she didn't argue. We both knew that sometimes the only way to expose corruption was to bend a few rules. I went home that night to find Elaine packing a small suitcase. Going somewhere? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Solomon invited me to spend the weekend at the retreat center, she said without looking up from her packing. He says I'm ready for the next level of spiritual work, but it requires extended periods of meditation and energy alignment. The whole weekend? Friday evening through Sunday afternoon. Don't worry, there will be other advanced students there, and Solomon will be guiding us through intensive awakening exercises. Intensive awakening exercises. I bet he would be. Maybe I should drive you out there, I suggested. I'd like to meet this Solomon guy face to face. Elaine's hands stilled on the clothes she was folding. That's not necessary, Gabe. Solomon prefers to meet people in the proper spiritual context, not in casual social situations. What's he afraid of? She turned to face me then, and I could see irritation flickering behind her usual dreamy expression. He's not afraid of anything. He's just very selective about the energy he allows into his sacred spaces. Not everyone is ready for that level of spiritual intensity. And I'm not ready. Honestly, no, I don't think you are. You've always been skeptical of anything that can't be measured or built with your hands. Solomon's work requires a more open mind. The dismissive tone in her voice hit me harder than I'd expected. This wasn't just about an affair anymore. Solomon had convinced my wife that I was somehow inferior, too spiritually limited to understand their elevated connection. Well, have a good weekend, I said. I'll try not to let my closed mind worry too much about you. She softened slightly. Gabe, I know this is hard for you to understand, but I'm becoming the person I was always meant to be. I hope someday you'll be able to see that this is a positive thing. I hope so too. But as I watched her drive away the next evening, her suitcase packed with white cotton dresses and that crystal necklace glinting in the sunset, I knew she wasn't becoming her true self. She was becoming Solomon's creation, another glowing, devoted follower in his collection of spiritual trophies, and I was going to make sure the whole town knew exactly what kind of enlightenment he was really offering. Saturday morning, I drove out to Solomon's retreat center, a large Victorian house on 20 acres of wooded land about 15 miles from town. Several cars were parked in the circular driveway, including Elaine's Honda. The house itself looked peaceful and welcoming, with flower gardens and meditation areas scattered around the grounds. But I wasn't there for the landscaping. I was there to document whatever was happening inside that house. I parked about a quarter-mile away and hiked through the woods until I had a clear view of the building. Through the large windows, I could see people in white robes moving around inside. The main living room had been converted into some kind of meditation space, with cushions arranged in circles and crystals displayed on low tables. Around noon, I watched Solomon lead a group of women, including Elaine, out to a garden area behind the house. They arranged themselves in a circle and began some kind of ritual involving chanting and synchronized movements. I used my phone to record as much as I could from my hiding spot in the trees. What I captured wasn't explicitly inappropriate, but it was definitely strange. Solomon stood in the center of the circle, directing the women through a series of poses and breathing exercises that looked more like interpretive dance than meditation. The women responded to his every gesture with devoted attention, following his lead without question or hesitation. But it was the individual attention that really bothered me. Throughout the group session, Solomon would single out specific women for personal instruction, placing his hands on their bodies to adjust their energy flow, or whispering private guidance in their ears. The women receiving this attention looked transported, almost intoxicated by his focus. I watched my wife arch her back under Solomon's guiding hands, watched her face flush with what looked like pleasure when he leaned close to murmur instructions. And I felt that familiar burn of rage and betrayal spreading through my chest. By evening, I had hours of recorded material and dozens of photos showing Solomon's hands-on approach to spiritual guidance. It wasn't pornographic, but it was definitely inappropriate for a supposed religious leader. Combined with the testimony from former members, it painted a clear picture of manipulation and exploitation. I spent Sunday morning editing the material and preparing a comprehensive package for Miranda. Photos, recordings, witness statements, financial information I'd gathered about the sanctuary's operations, everything we needed to expose Solomon's scam. When Elaine came home Sunday afternoon, she was practically glowing with satisfaction. "How was your weekend?" I asked. "Transformative," she said, using her favorite word. "Solomon worked with me extensively on opening my deepest spiritual channels. I feel like I've reached a completely new level of consciousness." "That's great, honey. I'm glad you're finding fulfillment." But inside, I was counting down the hours until I could deliver my evidence package to Miranda and start the process of destroying Solomon's operation. Monday morning, I met Miranda at her office and showed her everything I'd gathered over the weekend. Her eyes lit up as she reviewed the photos and listened to the recordings. "This is perfect," she said. "We've got current documentation, multiple witness statements, and a clear pattern of inappropriate behavior. I can have a story ready for Wednesday's edition." Wednesday might be too late. Elaine mentioned that Solomon is planning some kind of special ceremony next weekend. Something about final initiation for his advanced students. Miranda frowned. Final initiation into what? "I don't know, but it doesn't sound like something I want my wife participating in. Let me make some calls. If I can get approval from my editor, we might be able to rush this story into tomorrow's edition. And I'll contact the local TV station. They might be interested in doing a follow-up piece." The idea of television coverage excited me. A newspaper story might reach a few thousand people, but a TV exposé would reach the entire region. Solomon's reputation wouldn't survive that kind of scrutiny. "There's something else," Miranda said. "I did some more digging into Solomon's background. Stanley Kowalski has been running variations of this scam for over a decade. He's left a trail of broken marriages and empty bank accounts across half the country." "Has he ever been prosecuted?" "Twice, but both cases were dismissed on technicalities. He's very careful about staying within legal boundaries. But this time might be different. With multiple witnesses and current documentation, we might have enough to interest law enforcement." That afternoon, Miranda called to tell me the story had been approved for Tuesday's edition. She'd also spoken to a reporter at the regional TV station who was interested in doing a follow-up investigation. "We're calling it False Prophet Inside a Spiritual Scam," Miranda said. "It'll be front page with photos and excerpts from the witness interviews." "What about the TV piece?" "They want to do a live remote broadcast from the sanctuary during tomorrow night's session. Catch Solomon in action and get reactions from current members." The idea of confronting Solomon on live television appealed to me immensely. I wanted to see his face when his carefully constructed spiritual persona crumbled in front of the entire town. Tuesday morning, I bought 10 copies of the newspaper and read Miranda's story 3 times. She'd done an excellent job laying out the evidence. Solomon's real identity, his history of similar operations in other towns, detailed accounts from former members, and current documentation of his inappropriate conduct. The headline read, "Local Spiritual Leader Accused of Exploiting Female Followers." Below it was a photo I'd taken of Solomon with his hands on a woman's shoulders during the weekend retreat, along with the caption, "Stanley Solomon Kowalski leads a chakra alignment session at his retreat center." The story was comprehensive, damning, and impossible to ignore. By noon, I was getting calls from friends and neighbors who'd seen the article. By evening, the whole town was talking about nothing else. Elaine came home from work looking shaken and angry. "Did you see the newspaper today?" she asked. "I saw it. Pretty shocking stuff." "It's all lies, Gabe. Vicious lies from people who were too spiritually limited to understand Solomon's teachings. I can't believe that woman would print such garbage without investigating the truth." "What if it is the truth, Elaine? What if Solomon isn't who you think he is?" She stared at me with a mixture of hurt and suspicion. "You're behind this, aren't you? You gave them those photos and recordings." There was no point in denying it. "Yes, I did." "How could you? How could you try to destroy something so beautiful and meaningful just because you don't understand it?" "Because I understand it better than you do. Solomon isn't a spiritual teacher, Elaine. He's a con man who uses meditation and energy work to manipulate women into inappropriate relationships." "That's not true." "Then explain the recordings. Explain the photos. Explain why 3 different women from 3 different towns all tell the same story about his methods." Elaine's face crumpled, and for a moment I thought I'd gotten through to her, but then her expression hardened with resolve. "I'm going to tonight's session," she said. "Solomon will explain everything, and then you'll see how wrong you've been." "Elaine, don't go there tonight. The TV station is planning to broadcast live from the sanctuary. It's going to be a circus." "Good. Then everyone will see the truth about Solomon's work instead of these lies and distortions." She stormed upstairs to change clothes, and I knew I'd lost her, at least for now. But maybe seeing Solomon's reaction to public scrutiny would finally open her eyes to what he really was. That evening, I drove out to the sanctuary to watch the confrontation. The parking lot was packed with cars, news vans, and curious townspeople who'd come to see the drama unfold. Miranda was there with her camera, documenting everything for a follow-up story. The TV crew had set up their equipment outside the building, and I could see reporter Jenny Walsh preparing for her live broadcast. Inside the sanctuary, I could see Solomon addressing his followers, probably trying to convince them that the media attention was just persecution of their spiritual mission. At exactly 8 o'clock, Jenny Walsh went live. "Good evening. I'm standing outside the sanctuary, where controversial spiritual leader Solomon Creed is meeting with his followers for the first time since explosive allegations about his methods were published in today's newspaper. We're going to try to get a statement from Mr. Creed about these accusations." The camera followed Jenny as she walked toward the building. Through the windows, we could see Solomon's session in progress, about 15 women sitting in the familiar circle, with Solomon standing in the center gesturing dramatically. Jenny knocked on the door, but no one answered. She tried the handle and found it unlocked. "We're going inside now to speak with Mr. Creed directly," she announced to the camera. What happened next was better than anything I could have planned. Jenny and her cameraman walked into the middle of Solomon's session, lights blazing and camera rolling. The women in the circle looked startled and confused. Solomon looked like a deer caught in headlights. "Mr. Creed, I'm Jenny Walsh from Channel 8 News. We'd like to get your response to the allegations published in today's newspaper." Solomon tried to maintain his composure, but I could see panic flickering behind his eyes. "This is a private religious service. You have no right to interrupt our worship." "Are you denying the accusations made by former members of your group? Are you denying that you've used spiritual counseling as a cover for inappropriate conduct with female followers? These are lies spread by people who lack the spiritual maturity to understand our work here. Then you're willing to explain your methods? You're willing to demonstrate these chakra alignment techniques that several women have described as inappropriate touching?" Solomon's mask finally slipped. "Get out! Get out of my sanctuary immediately." But the damage was done. The camera had captured his loss of control, his inability to provide convincing answers to legitimate questions, and it had captured the confused, frightened faces of his followers as they began to realize that their spiritual leader wasn't the enlightened being they'd believed him to be. I watched from the parking lot as people began streaming out of the sanctuary. Some looked angry, others looked embarrassed, but most just looked confused and betrayed. Elaine was one of the last to emerge, and when she saw me waiting by my truck, her face crumpled with a mixture of rage and devastation. "Are you happy now?" she demanded. "Are you satisfied with what you've destroyed?" "I didn't destroy anything, Elaine. I just exposed what was already there." He was helping me become a better person. He was teaching me things about myself that I never knew. He was using you, just like he used all those other women in all those other towns. She stared at me for a long moment, tears streaming down her face. Then she got in her car and drove away without another word. I followed her home, but she locked herself in our bedroom and wouldn't speak to me. I could hear her crying through the door, and part of me wanted to comfort her, but I knew she needed time to process what had happened, to understand that I'd been trying to protect her, not hurt her. The next morning, the sanctuary was empty. Solomon had disappeared sometime during the night, leaving behind only a note posted on the door thanking his followers for their support and explaining that he was being called to minister in another location. By the end of the week, most of his former followers had quietly returned to their normal lives, embarrassed by their involvement, but grateful that the truth had come out before things went any further. Elaine took longer to recover. For several weeks, she barely spoke to me, alternating between anger at my interference and depression over the collapse of something that had meant so much to her. But gradually, as the shock wore off and she began to see Solomon's manipulation more clearly, she started to heal. "I feel so stupid," she said one evening about a month later, as we sat on our porch watching the sunset. "How could I have been so easily fooled?" "You weren't stupid," I told her. "You were vulnerable, and he was skilled at exploiting vulnerability. That's what predators do." "I'm sorry, Gabe. I'm sorry for what I put you through, and I'm sorry for not seeing what was really happening. I'm just glad I got you back." She leaned against my shoulder, and for the first time in months, she felt like my wife again. Not some glowing, distant creature, but the practical, sensible woman I'd fallen in love with. "What made you suspicious?" she asked. I thought about that glow, about the way she'd hummed strange melodies in the bathtub, about the crystal necklace and the overnight retreats and the way she'd said Solomon's name like a prayer. "You stopped being yourself," I said finally, "and I knew that whoever you were becoming, it wasn't someone you'd chosen to be." Solomon Creed, or Stanley Kowalski, or whatever his real name was, had moved on to another town, another group of vulnerable women, another collection of spiritual trophies. But he'd left behind a trail of broken trust and shattered illusions that would take a long time to heal. The important thing was that Elaine was home. The glow had faded from her skin, and she was humming songs I recognized again. Sometimes that's the best revenge of all. Not just exposing the predator, but reclaiming what he tried to steal. In the end, Solomon's final awakening had been his own. The realization that some husbands won't stand by quietly while their wives are manipulated and exploited. He'd opened a lot of souls during his time in our town, but he'd also opened himself up to consequences he hadn't anticipated. And that was a lesson in cosmic justice that no amount of spiritual rhetoric could explain away. 3 months after Solomon's hasty departure, I was finishing up a kitchen renovation when Miranda called with news. "Stanley Kowalski was arrested in Oregon yesterday," she said. "Same operation, different town, but this time one of his victims went straight to the police instead of suffering in silence." Good for her. The interesting part is that our story helped build the case against him. Prosecutors are using our documentation and witness testimony to establish a pattern of predatory behavior across multiple states. I set down my drill and walked outside to take the call in private. "Think it'll stick this time?" The district attorney sounds confident. Apparently Stanley got sloppy in Oregon, left a paper trail of financial irregularities and made some explicit promises to potential victims that crossed clear legal lines. "What about the women here? Are any of them willing to testify?" "Janet Morrison agreed to cooperate if they need her testimony. and 2 of the women from his previous operations are flying out to Oregon to meet with prosecutors. After I hung up, I stood in the Hendersons' backyard and thought about justice. Not the cosmic, spiritual kind that Solomon had preached about, but the real, practical kind that happened in courtrooms and police stations. Elaine was doing better now. She'd returned to her teaching job with renewed focus and had started seeing a counselor to work through the experience. The glow was completely gone from her skin, but something better had taken its place. A kind of grounded confidence that came from surviving manipulation and coming out stronger on the other side. I learned something important, she'd told me recently. Real spiritual growth doesn't require surrendering your judgment to someone else. It requires trusting yourself enough to recognize when someone is trying to exploit your search for meaning. That evening, I came home to find her in the kitchen, making dinner. Not humming mysterious chants, but singing along to the radio like she used to do. She was wearing jeans and a practical cotton shirt instead of flowing white robes, and her hair was pulled back in its familiar ponytail. "How was work?" she asked, kissing me on the cheek. "Good. Miranda called. Solomon was arrested in Oregon." Elaine paused in her stirring, then nodded slowly. "I'm glad. I hope this means he won't be able to do to other women what he did to us." "How do you feel about it?" "Relieved, mostly, and grateful that you cared enough to fight for our marriage, even when I couldn't see what was happening to it." We ate dinner at our kitchen table, talking about normal things, her students, my current projects, plans for the weekend. Outside our window, the old oak tree cast familiar shadows across the moonlit yard, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the ordinary sounds of a small town settling in for the night. No mysterious chanting, no cosmic energy, no glowing transformations, just the quiet satisfaction of having exposed a predator, saved a marriage, and learned that sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Solomon Creed had promised his followers that he could open their souls to cosmic consciousness. What he'd actually opened was a window into his own predatory nature, and given me the opportunity to show him exactly what happens when a husband decides to turn the ritual around. In the end, his final awakening,